Well, hello there. I didn't see you come in. Make yourself at home. Have a drink. While I give some attention to some underappreciated characters and storylines that I personally love. And I hope you grow to love as well. Hey there, everybody, and welcome back to another episode. Today we are reading Swamp Thing number 104. And just a little catch up on what's been going on in the last couple issues. Swamp Thing, Abby, and their daughter are on the run from a rogue elemental. And this elemental is the emissary of the Gray, where Swamp Thing is the elemental force of the Green. This being named Matango is the avatar of the Gray. And the Gray is like the world of decay and fungus and molds and stuff. So in the last couple issues, Matango sent his acolytes to kidnap and kill, Tefe, the daughter of Swamp Thing and Abby. But in the end, they were able to escape because of a friend of theirs named Brenda, who John Constantine sent to help them. And she was able to explode the body of the high priest of these acolytes, because with her magic, she can control like dead bodies and things like that. And that is where we left off. The team is going on the run some more, and the head acolyte has been defeated. So we start off on the cover of issue 104. And this issue has a subtitle underneath the Swamp Thing title. So it says that this storyline, is called The Quest for the Elementals. And this is part 1. And below that, we get a pretty cool image of the Parliament of Trees. And it seems that it is the inner sanctum of the Parliament, because we see the original 3 founders of this Parliament, Aum, Yggdrasil, and Taru. We also see a rooted Swamp Thing body in the foreground. And on the sides of him are other trees that are growing up, and they all have creepy faces on them. So we're not sure if this is a good thing or a bad thing. It could go either way with the Parliament of Trees. And we also see that this issue was written by Doug Wheeler with art by Mike Hoffman and Bill Joska. And we start off on the first page with Swamp Thing and Abby, and Swamp Thing is carrying her because if you remember from the last couple issues, she did hurt her leg during the fight with the High Priest of Matango. So he's carrying her, and they're in a wooded area, and it turns out that they are actually just outside of the Parliament of Trees. So this to me means that, since the end of the last issue, they have traveled down to South America, into the Amazon, where the Parliament of Trees is located. And they specifically mentioned that in order for them to travel, obviously, Swamp Thing can't fly on a plane or anything. So he actually shrunk himself down into like a plant spore and hitched a ride on her ring while she traveled down all the way to South America on a plane and then on a bus. And I will say she still has the same clothes on and still doesn't have a cast or anything for her leg. It's just a piece of wood with a rope. So somehow she traveled all the way down there with just that stuff. They do make mention that Abby thinks that the Parliament would be farther from civilization, and Swamp Thing does say that it used to be, but because of the deforestation going on in the Amazon, it is much closer to the Parliament of Trees now. So once they reach just the outside of the Parliament, Swamp Thing kind of takes a break for a second with Abby and lets her sit down, and immediately they're surrounded by a bunch of local tribes people. And Swamp Thing knows what's going on, but Abby doesn't, so she's kind of startled, and it turns out that these are just the guardians of the Parliament, so they go around stopping people from entering the Parliament grounds. So of course the tribes people have their native language, but they also speak Spanish, and luckily Abby speaks Spanish too, so they are able to communicate a bit. And she tells them that their daughter Tefe is already in the Parliament and that they're just going in to get her. And of course they don't believe her because they're like, no humans can go in there, but they don't know that Tefe is actually a spirit right now. So as they're saying, that's impossible, no human, all of a sudden Tefe flies out and, looking like Casper. So I don't even know if they can see her, but they probably can. Because if not, you just see Abby like yelling and then hugging nothing. And so I'm assuming they can see her too. And following close behind Tefe was the big salamander named Biffa. We met him once before, and he is like the go-between between the inner Parliament and the outer Parliament. So he is the messenger of the inner Parliament. So Biffa tells them he will escort them to the inner Parliament. So they follow him and they begin to walk into the Parliament of Trees. And Swamp Thing offers to carry Abby, but she's pretty salty, so she tells him, no, if I have to come before these rotted old stumps who've been messing with our lives, I'll at least do it on my own 2 feet. So they walk in behind Biffa, and we see there's like a long row of trees that they're kind of walking in between. And Abby's a little bit scared, but Swamp Thing tells her that she is like the first human that these trees have ever seen, and they're actually very scared of her. So apparently the walk's pretty long, and Swamp Thing decides he's going to ask Biffa some questions. So he asks, Biffa,
When I was here last, my mission was urgent, and I never learned what distinguishes the inner and outer parliaments, nor why they require you to be the messenger between them.
And Biffa responds, your actions during the Earth's earliest seasons created this parliament to protect the green and the life nourished by her. But in order to guarantee that creation's reoccurrence, all history had to follow the course contained in the memories you gave Yggdrasil. So what he's talking about here is all from the Rick Veitch run. If you remember, Swamp Thing went back in time until he went back to the very beginning of life forming on Earth. And during his time travels, Swamp Thing had gotten a couple of corn seeds that he planted at the beginning of life on Earth, and that is what ended up becoming the three main members of the Parliament of Trees: Yggdrasil, Aum, and Taru. So once they had grown, Swamp Thing talked to them and gave Yggdrasil his memories. So everything that the Parliament did up until that point was all based on the memories Swamp Thing gave them. So there was like a chicken and egg scenario here where Swamp Thing created the Parliament of Trees, but they had to live for eons waiting for the Alec Holland Swamp Thing to be born. And then they had to make sure he did all the same stuff. So they had to like confuse him and make his journey harder so that he would do the same steps that he did leading up to him going back in time. And the reason I'm going over all this again is because you have to understand that history in order to understand what Biffa says next. So he continues,
the problem was we knew you would visit us before your journey back in time, and that while here, you would see into the memories we all share, memories which would have contained your journey, which you had not yet taken. The time loop which created us to protect the green would have been broken. So, with the 13th member, the founders ceased sharing your and their memories with future elementals, the Outer Parliament, forcing the younger members to develop a group mind of their own, one which had none of your memories. My role was to pass verbal messages between the groves. But with the accomplishment of your journey through time, the founders have shared their minds with the rest of the Parliament, correcting many of their misconceptions, such as their former view of you as a failure. And as he says that last line, they walk out of the dense forest and into an open, water-filled area. And at the farthest side of this pool is the three original Parliament members, Aum, Yggdrasil, and Taru. And in columns on either side in between them and Swamp Thing are the rest of the 13 of the Inner Parliament. And it's pretty cool seeing them because just like Swamp Thing, these were all born of a creature's body, and then they became a plant elemental. So they all have characteristics of the bodies that they came from. So some of them look like jellyfish, some of them look like squids with shells on their back. And I didn't put it together before, but I guess this is probably why Aum looks like a horseshoe crab. And the one closest to Swamp Thing and his family is the last of the 13, and he looks like a Brontosaurus or Brachiosaurus, whatever they're called now. I myself call them long necks because of that movie, The Land Before Time. So as Abby and Swamp Thing enter the open water area, Abby starts to get upset again because she sees all this pond scum in the water, and she says, "Is this water clean? My leg could get infected. I mean, look at it." And Swamp Thing tries to reassure her by saying, "It is safe. The pond scum is one of the founders."
But this doesn't seem to placate her, and she says, "What? Alec, I don't like this. I know you had to bring Tefe down here to protect her from that thing that was after her, but he's dead now. Brenda destroyed him. We have Tefe back now. Let's go home." But then Biffa interjects and says,
"The one whom you destroyed was merely a servant. Your true foe is Matango, whose receptacle stands before us."
And what they're standing before is that long neck. And Swamp Thing's kind of taken aback by this, and he says,
"Matango is a founder?"
And Biffa says, "He was the 13th elemental and my immediate predecessor." And we see the name of this issue is Matango. So upon hearing that Matango was actually one of these 13, Abby gets even more mad, and she says, "That does it, we're leaving. It's just like I told you, Alec. This was all a trick by these senile old vegetables to get control of Tefe. Matango is one of them. Are you coming, Alec? What are you waiting for? If you trust them, why don't you ask them about that Alec Hallman creature you met? He said he was your predecessor. That's not what they told you. Go ahead, Alec, ask them." And Biffa responds to her by saying, "Alec Hallman was the elemental before you, but he was taken captive by the Grey before he could take root with us." And then Swamp Thing asks,
"And his story? Burned in a fire while experimenting with a biorestorative formula like me and Alex Olson? And all of our names, why are they so similar?"
And then another of the 13 elders answers him by saying,
"You gave us a map to your future, which we had to follow to assure our own creation and the preservation of the green. But the map was sparse, covering billions of years, and near the end we began to worry that perhaps we did something wrong, and so we began to choose men with the names similar to yours and subtly prod them towards studies of plant regeneration. The reason you can't remember the biorestorative formula is because Alec Holland never understood it. Ysigdrael rigged Holland's experiments, pointing him in the right direction.
And upon hearing this, Swamp Thing is very much taken aback, and there's a panel of him in complete shock at this revelation. And Abby sees his face and is like, what happened? What's going on? And Swamp Thing says,
"You did not hear their answer?"
And Abby says, "All I heard was some wind rustling through branches and leaves. What did they say?" And Swamp Thing says,
"Ysigdrael and the other founders deliberately caused Alec Holland's death in order to create me and assure their own existence."
And Abby asks, "And everything else? Everything that happened to you and me? Did they cause that too?" And Swamp Thing answers,
"Yes."
And he looks very, very angry and disturbed in this panel. And that's all Abby needed to hear. She's very angry and she says, "Need I say more? Let's go." And as they turn to leave, Ysigdrael says,
"M'Tongo still waits outside for you and Tefe. What you see in this grove is but the molded bark of its former self. Tefe now has the knowledge to build her body. Let Turu prompt her spirit with his mind and his visions."
And upon hearing this, Swamp Thing just kind of grabs Tefe off of Abby's shoulders, and he begins to walk over to Ysigdrael, and Abby's protesting, saying, "Alec, no, don't give her to them." But it is too late, because Ysigdrael has already grown an altar in the middle of the clearing, and Swamp Thing places Tefe on it. And when he does, it pulls Tefe down into the water, and Abby runs over yelling, "Tefe!" And she tries to reach him, but it's already too late, because the water begins to boil and bubble. And Abby says, "What? What's happening?" And Swamp Thing says,
"The Parliament is advising Tefe on how to build her own body."
And as they're talking, Tefe's body begins to form. And at first, it's just her organs that are kind of in the shape of a body. You see her brain and her brainstem and her eyeballs. And then it goes down into like her lungs and her intestines. And you see little growths of her arms and legs. But they're all fleshy and there's no skin on them. And then eventually skin begins to form until her body is completely grown again. And then the water swells up underneath her and offers Tefe back to Abby. And Tefe yells, "Mama!" And we get a nice family reunion where Abby's saying, "Tefe, I love you. I love you. Mama's here. Mama's here." And they're kind of doing like a big family group hug. And then Ysigdrael begins to talk again, saying,
"Now that you have your child fully back, perhaps you will remain to discuss the matter of her safety. Let Abigail feed from the fruit of Turu's wisdom, so that she may join with us in the sharing of our thoughts."
And some like weird little fairies come out and begin to pluck fruit off of Turu's branches, and they bring it to Abby. And I should say that Abby is super happy now. She totally forgot that she was angry at the Parliament. She's just happy that Tefe got her body back. So Swamp Thing tells her to eat the fruit in order to communicate with them. And Abby's a little hesitant to eat the fruit, and she asks if it's going to make her hallucinate like when she eats Swamp Thing's tubers and they make love. And Swamp Thing says it's similar, but it's not quite the same, and he will always be next to her, so she shouldn't worry. And he says,
"They wish to talk about Tefe and the threat to her from the Grey and M'Tongo."
So reassured, Abby eats it and instantly goes into like a psychedelic trip where it's just her and Swamp Thing and Tefe, and they're floating in the green. And Abby asks, "But isn't M'Tongo one of them?" And Ysigdrael answers,
"No, M'Tongo was one of the green, but he is no longer. Drink the pool's reflections up through your feet, and we will show you the rings of M'Tongo's history."
So as Abby's standing in the water, now she's in this psychedelic green space, and her feet begin to sprout roots just like Swamp Thing's, and they dig down into the mud of the pool. And Ysigdrael begins to explain the whole history of M'Tongo, saying,
"At creation's beginning, the forest lords and their master Scylla seeded the planets with potential for life. Green, blue, red, and violet, cast to each forming sphere by the celestial rain."
And what Abby's seeing at this moment is like the dawn of creation of the universe and these different colored seeds that are shooting out through space and hitting into different areas of planets. And Ysigdrael continues,
"On some worlds, life took root briefly before its silence resumed. while others remained barren for all eternity, alone. But on Jupiter and Earth, and a fifth planet now perished, life blossomed and thrived, and survives to this day. Where green gained dominion over the Earth, on this fifth world evolution followed a separate path, based on fungus and molds, and suckled from the gray.
And Abby interrupts him saying, "Wait, you're claiming that mushrooms have an extraterrestrial origin? Do you expect me to believe that?"
And Ysigdrall answers, "If not, then where are their fossil records showing their path of evolution? Why do only they feed by cell replication of their host? No other life on Earth does this. Their world's orbit drifted too close to Jupiter's gravity field and was pulled apart. Its life seared into a collective consciousness which retreated to dormancy as it searched for a home."
And then Swamp Thing says,
"So M'Tongo came from that planet? He was its collective consciousness?"
And Ysigdrall answers,
"No, M'Tongo was the 13th of our kind. He was the reigning protector when the Grey arrived on Earth."
And then we get a flashback of a meteor hitting the Earth and the protector M'Tongo alerting the Parliament to what just happened. And upon hearing this, Ysigdrall tells M'Tongo to take root with them in the Parliament. But M'Tongo refuses, saying that the Green needs him now and most species will perish from this disaster. But Ysigdrall tells him,
"The Green has witnessed many extinctions before. It is part of its foreordained legacy. Take root with us and we will create a new guardian. The meteor shower has sown strange spores in the sky, which the winds are spreading throughout the globe. We want a new elemental to assume the essence of this alien life form so that we may learn more of it."
And we're seeing flashes of like mushrooms already growing around the Earth and infecting the plant life. But M'Tongo doesn't accept, and he says that he wants to assume this new life form shape and report its natures and intentions back to the Parliament. And Ysigdrall, now telling Swamp Thing what he thought, says,
"But we saw within M'Tongo's thoughts, and it was his intentions which concerned us. Still, we permitted his assumption of this second form, provided he built a receptacle for the knowledge that his first form had gained him. M'Tongo thought that by remaining the Green's protector long enough, his knowledge might challenge ours, and he could build his own parliament. He thought this new life form might help him achieve this, by expanding his awareness beyond Earth. He hoped that in the wave of extinctions, this new form might gain dominion and aid his ascension. What he and we did not consider was that the alien life might have a will of its own, one which could use him and merge his own desires with the collective needs of the ghosts of the Grey's former planet."
And Swamp Thing asks Ysigdrall,
"Why did you send M'Tongo if you did not trust his motives?"
And Ysigdrall answers,
"New elementals take years to find their purpose. We desired a quicker assessment. When M'Tongo returned, it was as an emissary from the Grey. The vibrational frequency of his body had been altered, and his mind was no longer open for us to read."
And we get a panel of M'Tongo returning after he's been corrupted by the Grey, and his flesh is now all moldy and gray, and he pops out of the water and he says,
"We and M'Tongo have joined in one consciousness."
And with M'Tongo's corruption, luckily war doesn't break out or anything. There's actually a truce that happens between the Grey and the Green, and Ysigdrall says,
"We agreed to share the planet, and both forms became important in the balance of life. M'Tongo remained with us as an ambassador for the Grey, watching the succession of new elementals and the changing forms of life which played in our grove. His earlier ambitions appeared suppressed, and the Grey satisfied with our mutual reign. But the arrival within our grove of a new race of man changed that. Unlike those outside who had evolved with the Green and were in harmony with it, this race was placed among us, their essence in discord with the world."
So what Ysigdrall is kind of insinuating, and what is being shown in the panels, is these humans are playing in the Garden of Eden, I'm assuming is what the original Parliament was founded in. And the humans were placed there by someone outside. I'm assuming he's referring to God. So we see these humans going around the garden, and the woman is looking up at the branches of Turu, which has some fruit growing on it. So I'm assuming that Turu is supposed to be the tree of knowledge of good and evil that is referenced in the Bible. And on the branches of this tree next to the fruit, we see something that is kind of moldy looking. So I'm assuming M'Tongo is supposed to be kind of the snake or Satan who ends up tempting the woman to eat of the fruit. So in reaction to M'Tongo's attempt to corrupt man, he says,
We altered the weather and triggered an ice age, creating glacial barriers to protect the old race of men from the new. A war ensued between us and Matango, the green and the gray, in which life's balance was destroyed and mass extinctions took place. We were forced by an attack to abandon our original home, scattered to the world until we gathered once again here in the Amazon. Many of us were lost, absorbed into the gray, or trapped as prisoners during our great migration. To halt this war, which weakened both sides, we had brought the earth too close to death. We made a compromise in which the new race of man annihilated the old, and those lost to the gray remained so. Man's gradual destruction of his environment and the green has so far quenched Matango's desires and kept the peace. Your actions now have endangered the balance. They are disturbing Matango's sleep, awakening his wrath, and perhaps renewing the war. And then addressing Swamp Thing directly, Ysigdrael says, "You broke out of your prison within the claw of Elkhound, in which Matango had thought you safe. You freed Aeom from his entrapment built by Matango himself. You fed Tefe a kernel containing the spirit of the older race of man, initiating its rebirth on Earth. The Grey was already fearful of the implications of a human elemental. Do no more. Remain in the Parliament or you may trigger a second Holocaust." And as Ysigdrael is saying this, all of a sudden, this giant kind of monster thing comes out of the water and begins to try to eat Abby, and she yells out, "How do we get out of here? Back to reality!" And when she says that, a giant swamp thing comes over and swallows her up before the giant monster can. And this brings her and Swamp Thing and Tefe back into the real world. And Swamp Thing says to Ysigdrael, "My family and I cannot stay here hiding from Matango forever. This is not their home, and it is not yet mine." And Ysigdrael says to him, "As our primary founder, we understand the roots of your wish, but the danger to the green is too great. We forbid you to take further actions." And then Swamp Thing turns from Ysigdrael and looks at Aeom and says, "Aeom, your mind is not in agreement with the others. I feel your thoughts for those lost to Matango. You were a prisoner to the Grey and know it best. Will you not help me?" And Aeom answers, "Tefe's descendants are our future, but Matango will never tolerate them. The hundreds of us he holds captive will not satisfy him forever. If he is not confronted, all of the green will perish someday. But you and I are only two voices in the woods." And Swamp Thing looks over at a husk of one of the original founders, I guess, and there's no mind inside of it. So he says, "What about this founder? This receptacle is empty. Where is he?" And Aeom says, "This founder, Kanan Cax, lies at the site of his ambush, where he has been held since the Great Migration." And this gives Swamp Thing an idea, and he says, "Send his location to my mind, Aeom, and we will have a third voice. Then we can attempt to free all the others taken by Matango, whose tombs lie silent in the Garden of Bereavement." And then Swamp Thing turns to Ysigdrael and says, "Ysigdrael, if you are going to stop me, do it now." And he pauses, and he kind of looks at Ysigdrael straight-faced, and Ysigdrael doesn't do anything, so Swamp Thing turns to Abby and says, "I am going now, Abby, to gather the fallen into a force that might protect you and Tefe, and safeguard the balance of the two worlds of life." And with that, his body begins to wither away as he leaves to go find the fallen members of the Parliament. And that is the end of the issue. So if you guys have any comments, questions, or suggestions, you can email me at planestrains@comicbooks, all one word, @gmail.com. And remember to stay swampy.